A new roommate seemed perfect until small, unsettling changes became impossible to ignore. Discover the chilling truth of a seemingly friendly cohabitation gone horribly wrong, as one person's search for a dream apartment turns into a terrifying, real-life nightmare. When I first found the apartment, I thought I'd struck gold. The place was in a nice part of town, rent was surprisingly reasonable, and the guy I'd be sharing with seemed like a decent dude. I'll call him Josh. We met through a popular rental app that everyone swears by, and after exchanging a few messages and a video call, I felt pretty good about it. I mean, what could go wrong, right? Moving in was smooth. Josh was there to help me carry my boxes up the stairs, and he even offered me some of his furniture since the place was already partially furnished. He seemed friendly enough, kept to himself mostly, but was always polite when we ran into each other. I remember thinking that maybe this was one of those rare, perfect roommate situations. I mean, we didn't need to be best friends or anything, but getting along was a solid start. For the first couple of weeks, things were pretty normal. We both had our routines. I worked a regular 9 to 5, and Josh had this weird schedule that made it seem like he was always home. At first, I didn't think much of it. Some people work from home or have odd jobs. I wasn't going to judge. But then, little things started to catch my attention. I'd come home from work and notice that some of my stuff was different. Like my keys wouldn't be where I left them, or my phone charger would be in a different outlet. At first, I just brushed it off. Maybe I was in a rush in the morning and didn't realize where I put things, or maybe Josh moved them to clean up or something. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so I let it slide. But it kept happening. More and more, things just felt off. One day I came home to find my bedroom door slightly ajar. Now, I'm the kind of person who always shuts my door, so that freaked me out a bit. I went in and checked, but nothing seemed out of place, so I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I just didn't close it properly. Then came the night that really set things off. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, just trying to unwind before sleep, when I had this strange feeling. You know that sensation you get when someone's watching you? I felt that, hard. My room was dark, but the streetlight outside cast a faint glow through the blinds. I didn't hear anything, but something told me to look at the door. It was open again. My heart started pounding. I was sure I'd closed it. I lay there for a minute, frozen, staring at the crack in the door, trying to convince myself that it was nothing. Maybe it didn't latch properly. Maybe the wind from the hallway moved it. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The next morning, I decided to test myself. I placed a tiny piece of tape on the top of the door, just enough to know if it moved while I was gone. When I got home from work, I headed straight for my room. The tape was on the floor. The door had been opened. Now, I was freaked out. I wanted to ask Josh if he had any idea what was going on, but part of me was too embarrassed to bring it up. What if I was overreacting? What if he thought I was some paranoid weirdo? But then things got worse. A few nights later, I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. As I got out of bed, I noticed something on the floor near my door. I bent down and picked it up, and my stomach dropped. It was a small, folded-up piece of paper. I opened it up, and it just had 2 words written on it: "Nice dreams." I stood there in the dark, trying to make sense of it. My hands were shaking as I shoved the note into my pocket and headed to the bathroom. I splashed water on my face, trying to calm down, telling myself it was just a prank or something. But in the back of my mind, I knew something was seriously wrong. The next day, I tried to act normal around Josh, but every time I saw him, I felt this creeping dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew something I didn't. That night, I did something I never thought I'd do. I set up my phone to record while I slept. I just needed to know if something was happening while I was out. The next morning, I played back the footage. At first, it was just me, tossing and turning in my sleep. But then, around 3 a.m., the door creaked open. My heart pounded as I watched Josh step into the room, his face barely visible in the dim light. He stood there, staring at me for what felt like forever. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled something out, and took a picture with his phone. He stood there for another minute before turning around and leaving, gently closing the door behind him. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My whole body went cold. I felt sick. This guy had been watching me sleep, taking pictures of me. How many times had this happened? How much did he know about me? I knew I had to get out of there, but I didn't want to tip him off. I spent the day at work trying to come up with a plan. I decided to wait until Josh left the apartment. He usually went out around 7 p.m. for about an hour, and then I'd pack up whatever I could and get the hell out. That evening, I waited for him to leave. My heart was racing as I watched the clock. Finally, I heard the front door close, and I jumped into action. I started grabbing my stuff, shoving clothes and essentials into a bag, trying to be as quick and quiet as possible. But then, I heard footsteps in the hallway. My heart stopped. I peeked out of my room and saw Josh standing there, just staring at me with this weird, calm look on his face. He didn't say anything. He just stood there blocking the exit. "What are you doing?" he finally asked, his voice low. I need to go to a friend's place," I stammered, my mind racing for an excuse. "Is everything okay?" he asked, taking a step closer. I backed up, trying to keep some distance between us. Yeah, everything's fine. I forgot about something I needed to do." Josh didn't say anything for a long moment, just kept looking at me with that same unsettling expression. Then finally, he nodded. "Okay," he said, stepping aside. "Be careful out there." I didn't waste a second. I grabbed my bag and bolted out of there, not looking back. I ran down the stairs and out into the street, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop until I was several blocks away, where I finally called the police. They came and took my statement, then went to the apartment to arrest Josh. I found out later that they'd discovered a stash of photos in his room. Pictures of me, sleeping, eating, watching TV. He'd been tracking my movements, following me when I left the apartment, and documenting everything. The guy was seriously disturbed. I moved in with a friend after that, and it took me a long time to feel safe again. I still get chills thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't caught on when I did. I learned the hard way that you never really know who you're living with. Perfect Roommate? Maybe Not is a gripping story about a seemingly perfect living situation that quickly turns into a nightmare, especially with a clean, quiet roommate like Dan. This story will keep you on the edge of your seat as it unfolds, making you question how much you really know about the people you live with. When I first moved into my new apartment, I was pretty excited. I had just landed a decent job in a new city and was looking forward to starting fresh. The rent was reasonable, and the place was nice enough. 2 bedrooms, a decent kitchen, and even a small balcony. But what really sold me on the place was my roommate, Dan. Dan seemed like the perfect guy to share a place with. He was clean, quiet, and super respectful of my space. We hit it off pretty well during our first meeting, just 2 guys who like to keep things low-key. We even bonded over our shared love of a few TV shows and made plans to binge-watch them together when we had the time. It seemed like everything was lining up perfectly. The first few weeks went smoothly. We kept to our own spaces, but we'd chat here and there, share a beer on the weekends, that kind of thing. The only thing that struck me as odd was that Dan always kept his bedroom door closed. I didn't think much of it at the time. I mean, everyone has their privacy, right? But looking back, that should have been my first red flag. As time went on, I started noticing small things. Little annoyances, really, that didn't seem like a big deal at first. For one, there was this weird smell that would waft through the apartment every now and then. It was faint, but it was there, kind of like something rotting. At first I thought it might be coming from the trash, or maybe some food we'd left out too long, but I'd check the kitchen, and everything would be spotless. I even took out the trash more often just in case, but the smell persisted. The smell started getting stronger, and it seemed to be coming from Dan's room. It wasn't overpowering, but it was enough to make me start wondering what was going on in there. I thought maybe he had a pet he hadn't told me about, or maybe he was just one of those guys who didn't do laundry often enough. I figured I'd bring it up with him the next time we were both home. One evening we were both in the kitchen making dinner, and I casually asked Dan about it. "Hey man, have you noticed a weird smell in the apartment lately? I can't quite place it, but it seems to be coming from your room." Dan froze for a second, just staring at me like I'd caught him off guard. Then he quickly brushed it off with a laugh. "Yeah, I noticed it too. Probably just some old food I forgot about. I'll clean it up tonight." That answer didn't sit right with me, but I let it go. I mean, everyone forgets to clean up sometimes, right? But a few days later, the smell was worse, and it was starting to seep into the hallway. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The breaking point came one weekend when Dan went out of town to visit family. He'd be gone for a few days, and the smell was getting unbearable. I tried to ignore it, but every time I walked past his door, it felt like the stink was following me. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I hesitated, but eventually, I decided to open his door. Just a quick peek, I told myself. I'll check if there's something rotting in there, and if it's bad, I'll clean it up and tell him about it when he gets back. I wish I hadn't opened that door. As soon as I cracked it open, the smell hit me full force, almost knocking me back. But it wasn't just the smell that shocked me. It was the sight of the room itself. The neat, tidy image I had of Dan shattered in an instant. His room was a disaster zone. Piles of trash were stacked up against the walls. Old takeout containers spilling onto the floor. Clothes, both dirty and clean, were thrown everywhere, with no rhyme or reason. And the bed, God, the bed was covered in what looked like months' worth of unwashed sheets, stained with who knows what. But the worst part? The food. Dan had hidden piles of old, rotting food under his bed, in his closet, even in drawers. There were pizza boxes, half-eaten burgers, bags of chips, everything just left to fester and rot. Flies buzzed around the room, and I could see trails of ants leading to and from the piles of garbage. I backed out of the room, slammed the door shut, and ran to the bathroom to puke. I couldn't believe what I'd just seen. How could someone who seemed so normal be living like this? When Dan got back, I didn't know how to confront him. I felt like I was walking on eggshells around him. The worst part was, he acted like nothing was wrong, like he hadn't just spent the weekend in a pigsty. I tried to bring it up casually, but he just got defensive. "I told you I'd clean it up," he snapped. "You had no right to go into my room. That's my private space." I apologized, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong with Dan. The smell kept getting worse, and I started noticing other things too. He'd get weirdly aggressive if I brought up anything about the apartment. He stopped talking to me altogether, just locked himself in his room for hours on end. Then, the pests started showing up. First, it was just a few ants in the kitchen, then roaches. I found a rat in the living room one night, which was the last straw. I couldn't live like this anymore. I finally sat Dan down and told him that he needed to clean up his mess, or I'd have to report him to the landlord. He just stared at me with this blank look in his eyes, like he wasn't even processing what I was saying. Then, out of nowhere, he exploded, yelling, throwing things, calling me every name in the book. I'd never seen him like that before, and honestly, it scared the hell out of me. I packed a bag and left that night. I couldn't stay there anymore, not with Dan acting like that. I crashed at a friend's place and started looking for a new apartment the next day. I never went back, never talked to Dan again. Last I heard, the landlord had to evict him because the place was overrun with pests and the smell was seeping into the other apartments. Looking back, I should have seen the signs earlier. Dan wasn't just messy, He had a serious problem, one that I wasn't equipped to deal with. I don't know what happened to him after he got evicted, and honestly, I don't want to know. I just hope he got the help he needed, because living like that, it's not normal, and it's not something I ever want to experience again.